Whenever we're looking at our nervous system responses, there's often a shaming that we do. Number one, that we have a nervous system response. And number two, that we didn't pick the right one. So if we had a freeze response, we feel like we should have had a fight response. If we have a fawning response, we're embarrassed by that. It's kind of humiliating to be fawning. And so we feel that we should do something different than what we did. But one of the really important things about the nervous system and these responses is that it's an unconscious perception of threat. So it's our unconscious mind that assesses our situation and that drives whatever trauma response or whatever survival response we do. So that's really important to know. And as we're going through the inquiry, if you're finding like it's too much, just take a step back. You could do some tapping on your forehead. You could put images or thoughts into a frame, put them on the other side of the room. Notice that you're looking at an image, you're looking at thoughts. So I'm not trying to alarm anybody at all, just to notice that as we're working with what can be kind of difficult, and shame is one of those things that's very difficult for all of us, that it's really important that we stay grounded in this present moment. So as we go through, just to keep coming back to that. And I'll remind you of that as well. So fawning or people pleasing, compliance, going along with what isn't really in our best interest. There's a lot of way that this works. Some of it is quite intense and some of it is kind of oh, I'm just cooperating. There's a difference between cooperating and fawning. There's a flavor to fawning or people pleasing that's not well respected in our culture. So there's an automatic kind of a shaming of, if I use this, there's something wrong with me. Fawning and submission is a social survival strategy. It's shared with other mammals. So some animals exhibit this submissive or appeasing behavior. So we share that with other mammals. And it's a way to get along in the herd or in the group and a way to avoid conflict. So that's just the way it works. There's an alpha. It's not always male. Sometimes it's female. But there's always a stronger, and then there's a younger or the weaker. That's how it works. There's a dominant, and then others submit. And so in people, we do that as well. But also, we use fawning to get approval from people and to avoid rejection. So it's an excessive flattery. So we're not just acknowledging someone has more strength or that they're in a leadership position. It's a way to seek favor and to keep ourselves safe. So as we go through this, we're going to pause at different parts. Just look at what comes up for you. Where are the situations where you tend to fawn? Is it to certain people? Is it a certain environment? So when we have this somatic mindfulness, we become aware of the behaviors. Like we might notice, oh, here I'm saying yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. Why am I doing that? I don't normally do that. Or there's a certain tone of voice. There's something that, maybe we're kind of not meeting their eyes, we're turning away. So we can become aware of the behavior, and then also we can become aware of what is it that's leading to the fawning. There is some perception of threat where we wouldn't be doing it. So body language, tone of voice, phrases, those can be signals that we're starting to fawn or that we're fawning. Sometimes we're aware of it, and sometimes we're not. So sometimes, and I think we've all had this experience, if someone has asked us to do something that we don't want to do, and we do it anyway, we find ourselves agreeing. And that's one of the situations that everybody can probably relate to. So when we do that, and sometimes it's pretty innocuous, it's like, hey, do you want to go out for dinner? And you're like, well, I don't really feel like it, but okay. Other times there's a little bit more malevolence in it. Somebody's pressuring us to do something for their benefit. Like, hi, I'm coming to visit where you are. I'd like to stay with you for a month. It's like, oh, well, I don't know if that's going to really work for me. Oh, yeah, for sure. It'll be fine. And then we feel ourselves getting talked into something that we don't really want. This is a power play And it's good for us to know and to notice when we're starting to slip into fawning what's going on. We're not weak. We're not spineless. There's some kind of trauma response going on that's at the root of this. So, again, we have this neuroception, which is unconscious perception of threat. We have the negativity bias, and then we have that perception or that assessment that we're in some kind of threat or danger drives a behavior like fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. When I talk about fight, flight, and freeze, I don't include fawn because fawning is a more of a social. It's not as much, I mean, it happens if we feel it in the body. Dr. Stephen Porges with the polyvagal theory said he doesn't really consider fawning to be quite as physiological as a fight, flight, and freeze, although it shares a lot of the same mechanisms, and a lot of people do include that. So, one of the questions, can you afford to speak up? I found this has really changed for me over time. I've gotten a lot better at seeing what's happening, although it's not my superpower. I have to kind of think about it, or sometimes I'll think about it later and I go, oh, that's what was going on there. But as we can afford to speak up, so if you're in a situation where you have a boss who's a bully and you can't afford to lose that job, you don't have as much social power than you would if you're the boss and a colleague or a subordinate is doing the bullying or acting in a way that's not appropriate. So, this has a lot to do with our social status and where our social position, our power position. And as we get more accurate in our neuroception, we're more accurate in the is this a threat in the moment and what is my actual power in the moment? So part of what's happening when we're in a fawning situation is that we're flashing back to what was our position when we were a child. And especially if we had a dominant parent, but even if without a dominant parent, all parents are authority figures, we might not have been able to speak up. Maybe we were kind of ridiculed or made fun of or teased, so to speak, when we said, this is what I think, or when we made a joke that kind of fell flat or whatever it was. So we get trained, we get conditioned into this. So let's take a moment now and bring to mind a time when you said yes. We can always practice. These things are pretty predictable and they're repetitive. That's why it's important to work with them. So, thinking about somebody who's pressuring you intensely or maybe fairly subtly into saying yes. Maybe they're asking you to get together with them or they're asking you to do something. And bring that to mind, whatever that is for you. And notice that you're in your body here right now. We're doing an inquiry, we're not in the situation. And remember a time when you just went along with it, even though you didn't really want to go. You didn't want to do that. Notice how it feels in your body. Take a few breaths, look around the room as well. And if it's kind of intense, you could do some tapping on your forehead. You could put the image into a frame. So you see yourself saying yes. And notice how that feels in your body. And notice what kind of thoughts are in your mind about that as well. Are you criticizing yourself? Are you shaming yourself? And now let's let that move to the background. And in the same situation, see yourself saying something different. I'll have to think about it and get back to you. It's one that I've used for years because I do have that tendency to say yes when I don't mean it. I'll have to think about it. See yourself saying it. Say it out loud if you can. Let yourself feel that. No is a complete sentence. If somebody especially is badgering you, no. Or thank you for asking. And it's a no for me. But see yourself in the situation, feel that, see yourself saying it or say it out loud if you can. And then notice what that feels like. And this is something I've also done is I've gone back and said, I'd love to do that with you or for you or whatever it is that they've asked, but I really can't. My schedule won't allow that. I'm already overcommitted. So we can also go back. Even if we've said yes when we didn't want to, we can come back and get settled, can build our resilience up, do some practicing, and then go back. So let yourself see that too. Visualize it. Who is it that you're saying that to? What's the situation? Take a couple of deep breaths so you have enough air to have a strong voice. And let yourself say what it is that you really want to say. So let's look at this for a moment. We're going to go into an inquiry about this as well. So, shame is part of our social survival system. It's meant to immediately correct a behavior. So, toxic shame, and the way it's often used in our culture, is that we are wrong. We end up feeling like there's something really bad, we're irredeemable. There's nothing we can ever do to get back into their good graces or to get back into the community. So, it feels really bad in our body, and we want to escape it because that's what the purpose of it is. When we're talking to somebody about this, it's important for us to know. So if someone does something a behavior that's wrong, it's really important for us to say it in a way that gives them a feeling like I've done something wrong and I'm not wrong. And when we're working with our own inner critic, that's something that we can really work with as well. It's very important that we're not shaming ourselves. And when we do shame ourselves, that we catch it right away. So we need to look at the situation, look at the reason why we went into fawning, and that these survival responses have really helped us to survive. So bringing clarity and kindness can help us to release the shame. And that's the way that we can come back into connection with ourselves and also with the other person. So before we go to the next slide, let's take a moment to notice our body and our breath. Are there a lot of memories or is there a felt sense in your body right now? What it feels like to be shamed? If so, you could notice that as well. So, how does it feel in your body? Bring back a memory of when you were fawning. So, what was the situation that activated? What was the threat? How does it feel in your body? So, if you find that you're feeling kind of slumped over and your eyes are down, bring your head up, bring your eyes up, sit forward and let your chest come a bit more open. Take a couple of deep breaths. Sometimes it helps to look into someone's eyes, especially if they're not shaming you. If you're noticing the feeling of shame in your body, it's very helpful just to come up out of the shame posture. So if you're slumped over, head down, bring your eyes up and open your chest, bring your shoulders down. And what's going on? Is it your inner critic? Is it somebody else? So oftentimes we're really frustrated when someone will say, well, I didn't want to say no, but I just couldn't. Or I didn't want to say yes, but I just couldn't stop myself. And we're like, well, geez, all you needed to do was say no. And so sometimes we'll shame other people. And often we'll turn that on our own too. It's like, what's the matter with you that you couldn't speak up for yourself? Or why were you being so obsequious and people pleasing and sucking up? Don't you have any pride? So notice the kinds of things that you might say to yourself or that other people might say. And then let's work directly with those. So if it's a face, if it's words, you could put words into a frame like they're written out. Put that frame on the other side of the room. So keep your eyes open. so that you can remember in your nervous system that you're not back in the situation, you're here. And look at what's in the frame. The words, do they feel like they have some intensity to them? Are there sensations in the body that they're linked to? That's usually the case when there's some kind of traumatic shaming going on. You could take your eyes around the empty space. So look around the outside of the frame, take your eyes around a couple of times in each direction. And then when you look back at the words, notice if they've changed at all. Oftentimes they change when we look back after that. You could also do some tapping on your forehead, or even just make circles on your forehead just to bring your attention back to right now in this moment. I'm looking at a situation, I'm remembering something, and I'm not actually in the situation. Again, check your posture. Come out of the shame posture. If you're slumped, if your eyes are down, bring yourself up, open your chest, take a few deep breaths. And then you might have to do that for a little while until the intensity of that kind of settles. At some point, it's okay now to bring yourself into your own heart. So, the part of you that was scared into fawning, bring that part of you into your heart. You might have a sense of an age. It might be something that happened last week. It might be something that happened earlier in your life that you're thinking about. But bring that part of you into your heart and visualize yourself with them. So, your adult self, your safe, trusted adult self, can connect with the part of you that was scared into fawning. So, we're letting them know you're safe now. There's nobody here that's going to pressure you or make you comply. So we're helping to reduce the threat, helping to clear the perception of threat. We might do that by looking at them in the eyes. They can look at us. We might visualize holding them or holding their hands. We're reassuring them. What might they need to know? You're not to blame for your nervous system and your survival responses. You're not to blame. This is unconscious. It's something that's conditioned into us. It's something that happens to everybody in our culture. When we feel some kind of a threat and we go into fawning, it's not that there's something wrong with you. You're not weak. You're having a trauma response in response to a threat. You're fawning to keep yourself safe, to be included, to be not rejected, to not be bullied. It's a social mechanism, and you're not to blame for that. Let yourself really feel that. Let yourself connect with that younger self. And if your inner critic is still active, ask them to stand back. Say, no, I don't have to listen to that. It's not appropriate. Just be quiet. Come back into that connection with your younger self who felt scared and who needed to find a way to be included. So you were fawning. Notice if it feels okay to breathe. Relax your shoulders to look up. As we feel safer, we don't need the survival responses of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So, part of the work that we can do to heal is to bring our more reassured and stronger and resilient adult self into the picture here so we can connect with the part of us that was fawning, the part of us that couldn't speak up for ourselves, the part of us that just went along with something even though we knew it wasn't what we wanted. We can feel that in our body. We're not alone with this anymore. And then over the next minute or so, bring yourself out of the inquiry. Let that dissipate, let the memory dissipate. If you want, you could have your hand on your heart and keep that connection with that younger part. And if it feels like it would be helpful, you can continue this. You could come back to this part of you that, especially if it's a repeating pattern for you, where you go into fawning or where you go into shaming yourself, that you could always come back and connect in a kind and compassionate way with that part of you. We don't have to be perfect to accept ourselves and love ourselves.